Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Atenas and this is Mode Bespoke. Today we're going to be working on a swimsuit cover-up, and this is for everybody who likes to go to the pool and just wants to cover up your bathing suit a little bit while you're walking around. This is a pattern I designed for my kids' swimsuit cover-up. However, you can also make this for adults. So let's get started. The full list of materials as well as a sizing chart and the free written pattern can all be found on the blog. The link is in the description box below. So to begin, we're going to need to make 2 panels, and this is in the same stitching, and this is what's going to make up our dress. So it's going to be 2 long panels, and the measurements can be found, like I said, on the blog, but if you're going to be making this for an adult, because I only have sizing for children available there, you're going to need to measure around either your chest or your waist, whichever size is bigger. And you're going to divide that by 4. That's going to be the width of one of these panels. So you will need to work in multiples of 2, and again the panel is going to be 1/4 of the width of either your chest or your hips, whichever is bigger. The pattern is a repetition of 2 rows, and it's a row of crossed double crochets and a single crochet row. So as you can see, it's just a single crochet and then a row of crossed double crochets, single crochet, crossed crochets, and so forth until you get the entire panel. We'll talk about the length a little bit further in the pattern, but it will just be the measurement of the height of whoever it is that you're making it for. So whether it's for your kid or for you, just measure how tall you are, and that's the length you're going to crochet for this. So it's a nice and lengthy swimsuit cover. You can make it shorter if you want to, but that will be up to you. So to begin, I'm going to use 1 skein of Caron cakes, and this is just the big cakes, but this is going to be for my 4-year-old. So if you're going to be making it for an adult, you may need 3 or possibly 4 skeins of this yarn, if not a little more. So let's get started here with a pattern. We're going to begin with a slip knot. So wrap the yarn around 2 fingers, and then you're going to insert your hook into that space, and this is a 9mm hook or an N hook. We're just going to insert the hook into that little space between our fingers, pull some yarn through, and then we remove our fingers and tighten the knot by pulling on the 2 strands of yarn. So we're just going to begin with a chain in multiples of 2, so you have to end on an even number. To make a chain, you're going to yarn over and pull your hook through the loop on the hook already. So yarn over and just pull your hook through that loop, yarn over and pull through the loop. I'll do another one here with you, yarn over and pull through the loop. So I'll just keep working on this. Remember that it is worked in even numbers, so just make sure that you crochet in an even number and that it is 1/4 of the length around either your waist or your chest measurement. If you're making this for a child, I do have children's measurements. They're going to be available on the blog. So go to modebespoke.com and you can find the pattern for this project, and it's going to have those measurements available there. They will be available in centimeters and in inches. Alright, so I've finished my chain, and I'm going to measure it here just to make sure that it is the length that I need. I crocheted 20 stitches, so make sure that you remember that. So when you make your second panel, you make the same number of stitches. So I've crocheted anywhere between 6 to 7 inches, which is what I needed. And now we're going to start with our next row. So we're going to begin with a chain 1, and then starting on the 2nd stitch from your hook, so not the chain you just made, but the chain right before that, you're going to begin to make a single crochet. So insert your hook into the stitch, and then you are going to yarn over, pull your hook out of the stitch. You'll have 2 loops on your hook. You're going to yarn over and pull through both of those loops. That's a single crochet, and you're going to need to make a single crochet in every stitch of your chain. So to make another one, insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, pull your hook out. You have 2 loops on your hook. You're going to yarn over and pull through both loops. So we'll do one more. Insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, pull your hook out of the stitch. You've got two loops on your hook, yarn over and pull through both loops. So we'll just keep working a single crochet in every stitch of the chain. So I'm at the very last stitch, so as you can see it's right here, this little one. We're going to have to finish that with a single crochet. I'll just yarn over, pull through both loops, and there's row 1. So this is one of the 2 rows we're going to repeat over and over, but it gets a little easier once you finish this next row. So to start row number 2, we're going to need to start with a chain 3. So we're going to start with 1, and then chain 2, and then chain 3. We're going to turn our work around, and we're going to skip the very first stitch, which is this one right here. We're going to work into the second stitch, and we're going to be working a double crochet. So for this entire row, you're going to skip a stitch, work into the next one, and then you're going to work back into the skip stitch. So we're going to start by yarning over, skip the first stitch, go into stitch number 2, insert your hook into the stitch, so make sure you go through both loops of your stitch, and then you're going to yarn over and pull your hook out. You're going to have 3 loops on your hook, so we're going to yarn over and pull through 2 of those loops. You'll have 2 loops left, yarn over and pull through the 2 remaining loops, like so. Now you're going to go back to that to the skipped stitch. So yarn over, and then you're going to insert your hook into the stitch you skipped. That's kind of a tongue twister there. Insert your hook into that skipped stitch, yarn over, pull back out. You're going to have 3 loops on your hook, so you're going to yarn over, pull through 2, and then you're going to yarn over and pull through the last 2 loops. So that is our first crossed double crochet. Now we're going to go into stitch number 4. We're going to skip stitch number 3, go into number 4, and we're going to do the same thing over again. So yarn over, skip 3, go to 4, insert your hook, and then we're going to double crochet. So yarn over, pull through the stitch, and now you yarn over, pull through 2, and yarn over, pull through 2. Now we're going to go back to stitch number 3, which is the one we skipped, so you can see that little space in there. We're going to go into that stitch, and we're going to make another double crochet. So yarn over, pull up a loop, and now we yarn over, pull through 2, and yarn over, pull through 2. We'll do another one. So we're going to skip stitch number 5 and go to number 6, and we're going to make a double crochet in stitch number 6. So now just yarn over, pull through 2, and yarn over, pull through 2, and now we're going to go back to stitch number 5. So that's the one that we skipped, and we're going to make a double crochet into that stitch. You're going to repeat this pattern for the rest of the row. So skip a stitch, double crochet, and then go back to the skipped stitch and make a double crochet in that stitch. It'll cross your double crochets so it looks like little X's. So now we're at the last 2 stitches of the row, and this last stitch is kind of hidden, so you may have to look for it a little, but it is there. So look for that one, and that's where you're going to crochet your next double crochet, because we're going to end in a crossed stitch. So you don't end in a straight line, you just end in a cross stitch. So I'll make my first double crochet into that very last stitch, and we'll close this out, and then we're going to go back to the skipped stitch and finish the row. So for me that's stitch number 19. And there we go. So now our second row is done. So this is the second row that you're going to repeat over and over again. So let's review that first row. So you chain 1, you're going to turn your work around, and beginning in the very first stitch, you're going to begin to make a single crochet in every stitch of the row. So I'll do these a little bit more slowly, but if you can't remember how to do a single crochet, go back 1 row, so that way you can review that while we go through it really slowly. So I'm just going to keep making a single crochet in every one of these stitches. And if you're having a hard time seeing the stitch, you can't see it, turn your work sideways. What you're going to see are these little V's. So that is a stitch. So each one of your little V's, you do have to go through both sides of the V, so through both of the loops of the stitch in order to actually crochet into the stitch. So insert your hook through both loops and then make your single crochet. So I'll just keep working on a few more of these single crochets until we get to the end of the row. So we're at this last stitch of our row, and there we go, we are done with row number 3. And now we have to repeat the crossed double crochet row. So to start that row, we always begin that one with a chain 3. So we'll make 1, 2, 3, and now we're going to turn our work around, and we're going to skip the first stitch. So go into the second stitch and make your very first double crochet. So here's stitch number 2, we double crochet, and now we're going to go back to stitch number 1 and double crochet into that one. So the easiest way is just to cross over the front of your stitch, and that way both sides, one side will lay over the other and create that, it'll look like little X's. Alright, so we made our double crochet in stitch number 4, and now we went back to number 3, skip the next stitch, which would be stitch number 5, go into stitch number 6 and double crochet. Now go back to stitch number 5 and double crochet, and there we go. So it's going to look like little X's. So I'm at the end of the row again. This last stitch is always going to be a little bit hidden, but there it is at the top. So work your last little double crochet X. There we go, and our row is finished. So for the rest of the pattern, we're just going to keep repeating these rows. So this next row is just going to be chain 1, and then we're going to make a row of single crochets. So turn your work around, start on the very first stitch, and start working a single crochet. And then just do a single crochet in every one of the stitches until you get to the end, chain 3, and turn your work around and work a double crochet row. So keep repeating this until you've made a length, the length of the panel that you need for your dress. So for the length, it is going to be the height of the person that you're making it for. So, and that's going to be a long, that'll make it a nice long dress cover. So if you want it to be shorter, just maybe make it a little bit less. Maybe go from the measurement of maybe from like your feet up until maybe your shoulders, and it'll make a shorter dress. So as you can see here, this is the panel that's done. I just repeated the row over and over until I got the length that I needed. So here we are, I finished this panel, and I made it 41 inches. So this is for my 4-year-old. So I made 41 inches worth of this pattern, and now we're going to start working on the side. So this panel only has one side of single crochet. So this little edging is just single crochets all the way across. This is where I'm going to put my buttons, so I only made one row. I'm going to show you how to do the side for the buttonholes, and that one's going to need 3 rows of the single crochet. So to do that, you're going to end on a row of single crochets. So let me get the hook in and I'll show you what I mean. So let's turn this around and see, the very last row I did is a row of single crochets, and that will make both sides of the panel even. So the very top part and the very bottom part will be even. So to move on to the edging, because we're only going to do the edge on one side of your dress. So in this very last stitch, you're going to need to make 2 single crochets, and both of them are in that very last stitch, which is the one that you made your last single crochet in. So there we go, we have 2, and what that's going to do is it's going to bring us around to the side, so it's going to give us a little bit of a corner, and now we can start working along the side of the dress. So here's the panel turned to the side that we're going to be working on, And as you can see, the stitches aren't clearly defined, but if I pull this up a little bit closer, you're going to see these little gaps in here, and that is the space that's created between the stitches. That's where we're going to be making our single crochets. So that's going to count as your stitch essentially. So insert your hook into that first little space, and you're going to make a single crochet. And then you see this next little gap right there? We're going to insert our hook there and make a second single crochet, or I guess the second one of the row, because you're only making one per stitch. Going to go into the next space and make a single crochet, and then go into the next one, which is right there, and you're going to make a single crochet. And we're just going to keep working on this until we get to the corner. So just keep making a single crochet in every stitch until you get to the other side. And then if this is the first panel you made, that's where you stop and you're going to weave in your ends. If this is the second panel, we're going to keep making another 2 rows so that we can make buttonholes. So now this very last stitch of the row is a little hidden, so look forward a bit and then you'll be able to have nice little even edges. So now that we've finished this first row, I'm going to make the buttonholes, so I'll show you how to do that. So these are the buttons I'm using. I'm only using 3, you can use as many as you want. But what I'm going to do is you're going to want to measure where you want your buttons. So I'm going to get 3 stitch markers, and I use bobby pins, but if you want to use stitch markers, use whatever you want to use. You can also use little bits of leftover yarn as well, or safety pins if you want. So you're going to divide your panel into thirds, and then you're going to put your buttons in 1/3 only. So ignore 2/3 of the pattern, and then on that first third is where you're going to use, or is where you're going to place all of your buttons. So I'm just going to put some of my markers here, and this is just going to give me an idea of where I want to place my buttons. And then I've decided to just go back and just show you how I fold it. So I'm going to fold my panel into thirds like so. Make sure that everything is even and they're nice even thirds, so see all the edges line up. And now I have this top third, and this is the one that I want my buttons to go on. So this third is what I'm going to divide evenly so that I have 3 buttons evenly placed. So if you want to add more buttons, then place them evenly here and use a stitch marker for everyone. If you don't want to use buttons, then you're done. I mean, you could stop at this point and then skip forward towards to the part where we start sewing it, and then we can sew your dress and you can be finished. But if you're going to add a couple of buttons, then just make sure that you place them evenly. See, in 1/3 of the dress, and then we'll move on to sewing, to crocheting the buttonholes for all of these buttons. So we're going to go back to where we left off, and we're going to chain 1, and we're going to start working our way back. So chain 1, turn your work around, and then beginning on the very first stitch of the row, which is this little guy right there, you're going to start to crochet a single crochet in every stitch until you get to your first stitch marker, which is where we're going to make that first buttonhole. So here we go, working 1 single crochet into every stitch till we get to that first buttonhole. And then while I'm doing this, if you are interested in the written pattern, it is available for free on my blog. That's modebespoke.com. The link is in the description box below. You'll also find a sizing chart for children's sizes, because I find that for adult sizes, if you're making it for yourself, it's just easier to use your own measurements, so that you can make it a little more, whether you want it looser, whether you want it tighter, it's a little more customizable if you just use your own sizing as opposed to just a general sizing chart. But the children's sizing chart will be available for you to use. Those are just standard children's sizing in the US. It will be available in centimeters and in inches, so you can use them no matter which unit of measurement you use. And if you have enjoyed our crochet pattern so far and you've liked any of the video tutorials, you can also sponsor our channel. We have a support page So that is also on the blog, so go check out that support page. You can help contribute to the channel, and that helps us buy supplies and materials we need to keep making these crochet tutorials. Alright, so I just kept working until I got to this very first stitch marker. I'm getting really tongue-tied with stitches today. So I'll just keep making a single crochet until I get to this one, and then we're going to need to chain a few stitches. So depending on the size of the button, that'll kind of tell you how many stitches you need. And what I mean by that is you're just going to start with a number. So I'm going to start with chain 3, and we're going to measure it. So because I have a really wide button. So I'm going to chain 3, skip your stitch marker, so skip the stitch with the stitch marker, and in the stitch right next to that, make a single crochet. Now take your button and measure it. So make sure that it fits. If it's too loose, maybe go down a chain, so do it again and maybe do a chain 2, and then skip a stitch, make a single crochet, and then keep working. But if you're using big buttons like mine, 3 or 4 stitches should be more than enough to make a big buttonhole. And now between the buttonholes, you're just going to make a single crochet in every stitch until you get to the very next buttonhole. So this one isn't too far away, so I'm just going to keep crocheting here and show you how to do this next one. And you're going to do the same thing for however many buttons you're going to add to your little swimsuit cover up. Okay, so when you get to the stitch marker, see, here we go, make sure you crochet a single crochet in on either side. You need one on each side of the stitch with the stitch marker, but skip that one stitch, the one that has a stitch marker, okay? We're going to need to crochet a chain 3 because it's the same number that we used for our last buttonhole. Skip the stitch marker stitch, single crochet in the stitch after that, and then just keep working single crochets until you finish your row. If you're going to add more buttons, make another one of these buttonholes. Alright, so I got to the end of the row, and I single crocheted up until the very last stitch. And now we're going to chain 1, turn our work around, and we're going to work a very last row of single crochets. So beginning in the very first stitch of the row, we're going to start with a single crochet and work a single crochet in every stitch until you get to the chain space. Now for the chain space, depending on how many chains you made, you're just going to add 1 stitch additional to the chain that you made. So I made a chain 3, so I'm going to need to make 4 single crochets into the chain space. If you made a chain 2, then you need to make 3 single crochets in that chain space. So here's my chain space, here's my stitch right next to it, single crochet into the stitch right next to that chain space. And now in the chain space, I made a chain 3, so I need to make 4 single crochets into that chain space. And then we're going to single crochet in the stitch right next to that chain space, and we're going to continue to single crochet until we get to the very next chain space. So here I'm working up to the next chain space, and that way I can show you how to do this one more time. So make sure you stitch in the stitch right before the chain space, and here's that chain space. We're going to make 4 single crochets into that space. So if you used any other number for the previous buttonhole, use that same number. I used 4, so I'm going to crochet 4 single crochets into that chain space. And now I just single crochet in the next stitch right after that space, and I'm just going to keep working a single crochet until I get to the end of the row. Since I have one last buttonhole left, I'll work the same pattern that I just did for that last buttonhole until I get to this end. And now see, we're at the end, and all we have to do now is just weave in this thread of yarn. So leave a nice long tail here at the end, and you're going to remove your hook and pull the yarn along with it. And now you're going to need to get your yarn needle or your tapestry needle. Get that threaded, and I'm going to show you how to weave in the ends. If you've done this before, you can skip it ahead a little bit, but for anyone who hasn't done this before, we're trying to not just hide the tail end of yarn, we're also trying to knot it up in a way so that you can easily wash your crochet item and it's not going to become unraveled. So I like to weave in my ends in a bit of a square pattern. So I'll just make one stitch going downward, and then I'll make one stitch right to left, and then one stitch from bottom to the top, and then one stitch going left to right. So it'll look a bit like a square. So I'll do usually about 3 to 4 squares, so I'll sew that way, and that'll help hide this little tail end of yarn, and it'll also keep my work from unraveling. So I'll give this a few more stitches, and then at the end I try to find one nice long stitch and just give one big stitch and then cut the little tail end of yarn that's left. So here's a nice long stitch, and then when I'm done I just also remove my tapestry needle. So here, let me get this finished. There we go. And then sometimes a little bit of a tug will hide the tail end of yarn, but if you still have this little bit left, just pull on it a little bit and then you can cut that little tail end off, and that way when you tug on your work a little bit, it'll hide whatever's left. So there we go. Do the same for any other threads of yarn that you have left on both of the panels, and then we can sew it together. So to sew it, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here to kind of teach you how to sew these two sides together. And this is the back side of our dress. So if you're not using any buttons or anything, you just want to make it kind of like a tunic, you can do this on both the front and the back side. But if you're just doing the back side because you're adding buttons to the front, then this is how you're going to start this. You're going to need your yarn or tapestry needle, and then you're going to need to thread that with a length of yarn and just make a little knot at the end of that length of yarn, and we're going to start stitching. So I'm just going to line up my 2 bottom corners, and this is on the side that doesn't have the buttonholes, so this is on that other end. So I'm just going to stitch up and hide my little knot on the inside of the dress, and then I'm going to give a nice big stitch or two to get to the very bottom corner, and that way I can start to sew and my tail end of the yarn is hidden, and that way you won't be able to see the little knot. So I'll just stitch this until I get to the corner, which I could have used one long stitch and done that a lot quicker. There we go. Alright, so now what you're going to do is you want to line up your work so that the edges are nice and even, and that should also line up your stitching. So here we go. So I'm going to try to do this while holding this all one-handed. I don't know how successful this is going to be, so I can hold it really close to the camera. But basically what you're going to do is you're going to stitch from one side to the other. So I'm going from right to left, and I'm just going through a couple of stitches here on both panels. So here you can see that was the single crochets that I worked. So I'm going to go from right to left, and now I'm just going to move my needle over a little bit on the left side and then go from left to right. Line up your stitches so that you don't have a visible seam, and then on your crochet stitches you have both of those loops. Go through the loop. Don't go under or over both of them, just go through them, and that way you'll make a very invisible seam, because otherwise you'll either see both sides of the stitch on the top or on the inside, and your seam will become a lot more visible. So now I'm going to stitch from right to left, and also going through the middle of the 2 loops of my crochet. So of that stitch, go, and then I'll just keep stitching this way until I get to the point where I want to stop. So I'll keep working on this a little bit And then I'll show you, I'll zoom out and I'll show you a little bit better with a different angle, because this is a little difficult holding it up with one hand. So here, I'll keep working on this. But how to know when to stop is the easiest way for me to measure it was to fold my both panels in half. So that way you can measure where the neck is going to go. So you want it to fall over your shoulders and you don't want to make the stitch all the way to the very top. So if you fold it in half, add a couple of inches to the top. So I added, it was a little over 2 inches from the very top fold down, and that way I have enough space for the neckline to drape a little bit, and it's not right up along your neck, because that would make it a bit uncomfortable, especially if you get your little bathing suit cover up wet. It'll just keep rubbing up against the very back of your neck. So this is how you stitch it. As you can see, it's kind of invisible. I'm gonna have to redo this because I left really big gaps like this, but it was very difficult to sew it. So I'll go back, give it a couple more stitches a little more closely together, and then I'll just keep sewing until I get almost halfway up the back of the dress. Like I said, leave about 2 to 3 inches from the top, and then that way you have a little bit of space for your neck. And then we're going to do the same stitching for the sleeve. So we're going to leave a big space here for the sleeve, and that way it'll be very comfortable for our arms. But I'll show you a little bit better how I sewed this back part, and then we'll go back and talk about the sleeve and how much space to leave. So here I moved my camera a bit, and then I was able to zoom out a little, and now I can use both of my hands. So as you can see, it's really not that intimidating to sew this. It just seemed a little more complex when I'm trying to balance everything. But I'm just going to sew from right to left, and then from left to right, always going into the single crochets so that we can hide the yarn better. So here we go, left to right. Now I'm going to go to the next single crochets, going through all of those stitches, and then pull that through. And now I do the same, going left to right. Them with your screw. So there we go. See, it's a really quick sew project, so you don't have to know how to sew very well. You just have to be able to do a basic stitch, and you should be able to sew your dress together. I finished all the glue. So I'll just keep working on this until I get to my stitch marker, and then we can work on the sides.
Here's the first button.
So I've worked up until my stitch marker, so here's my stitch marker. Let's get that moved out of the way. And I'm just going to do my last stitch up here. So I'm going to do a couple of stitches because this is the top part that goes right below your neck. So, and this is for a 4-year-old who's probably going to be putting it on and taking it off a lot. So I don't want this top part to open up. So I'm just going to give it a couple of stitches. Then I'm going to give it a stitch on the inside. So I'll stitch towards the inside of it, flip it inside out, and then do another stitch or two in here, and I'll also make my little knot on the inside part right here, and then I'm going to weave in my ends. So I'll start working on making a knot, and then just tighten it up as I go. So here we go, loop that through, and then I want to weave in my end. So instead of having to rethread my needle, I'm just going to pull it through to bring it close to my work. That way I'll only leave a little tail end of yarn, and that way I don't have to weave in so much yarn. So I'll just move my needle to where I want it to be, and then I'm going to cut the rest of the yarn off, which I'm then going to use, since I have a very long length of yarn, I'll use that same length to crochet or to sew the sides together. So now that I've got that all set up, I'm just going to go through and weave in my ends. So I'm just going to change directions here a lot. because I've made quite a few knots. Here's a big stitch. Let's pull all this out. I've got a big thread of yarn left, so I'm just going to cut that. Give that a little bit of a tug, and we can have that little tail end hidden. Alright, so now we have to sew the sleeves. Now for the sleeves, the easiest way I found to measure it is just to measure it also in thirds. So fold it in half, and then kind of mentally divide it into thirds, and then go down 1/3. So that way, that's where you'd put your stitch marker, and you have about 1/3 of your dress is going to be open for sleeve. So if you want to make it a little bit tighter, then go ahead and just measure your arm and hold a measuring tape to where it's comfortable and do that. But I just kind of, I'm eyeballing it here and then doing 1/3 of the way down. So from the top part, so from where the shoulders would be, so up here where the shoulders are, 1/3 of the way down, that's where I'm going to put a stitch marker on both sides, like that. And then I'm going to open the dress, line up my edges. So here are my little corners. I'll line everything up, and then I'll do the same stitch I did in the back. I'll do the same thing for the side, up until I get to my stitch markers. And then I'll knot it up the same way, weave in my ends, and my sleeve will be ready. So I've sewed both sleeves together. So here's one side, and then the back we sewed together, and then I did the other side as well. So now we're going to line up our buttons. So if you're familiar with how to line up buttons, then we are done. But for anybody who has never sewn buttons before, easiest way I have found to do this is to just line up your buttonholes with the dress. So you're going to line up all your edges and all your corners and make sure that your dress lays the way that you want it to, or your project lays the way that you want it to. And then I'm just going to use a couple of stitch markers to just mark where my buttonholes are. So here's one of the buttonholes. See, I laid it on top of my other side and then just marked it there. So there we go, it's all lined up. So now I know that that is where my button is going to go. I'll do the same thing for the remaining buttonholes, in which case I have 2, so I'll do that for the last 2 remaining buttonholes. So line all of my edges up, make sure everything lays flat, and then I'll just hold my finger into the buttonhole and then just put a stitch marker on there. And that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial. If you give it a try, let me know how it works out for you. If you want to see the written pattern, don't forget to swing by the blog. That's modebespoke.com. You can find the pattern for this project and many other crochet projects for free on the blog. If you haven't subscribed already, hit the subscribe button. I post videos every Thursday. If you want to see any more of my work, you can follow me on Instagram. And if you do crochet this project, you can also tag me with #modebespoke, and I'll be able to see all of the projects that you've crocheted. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and to share it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all again next Thursday.